People start.
I had a meeting. It's their
Let's do something.
So I was just trying to get myself coming here.
Are they talking about going out east?
Yeah, that works,
Yeah,
but
they
that's
are.
why
As soon as you point
I
it.
had to respond because I couldn't get it
Feels
to
like-
open, so.
It's a good group.
Still haven't finished it, anyway, that's
Yeah,
okay.
but there's
I even forwarded
this
it
also-
to
I've seen that
my
presentation like
regular account,
3 times
and
in
then
the last 2 years now.
it takes the attachment around, but I figured that's what it was.
Yeah, so is it the Outlook to the iOS?
Because it comes in as an ICM file or some weird,
I see it.
Oh, yeah, the weekly updates.
Yeah.
I can't accept it. I see it.
I can't look at them on my phone.
oh, it won't let me open
Oh.
the ICM file.
Mine just, I have it running.
I have to look
The
at them on
ICM
my.
file?
I have emails that just like a weekly update or something else.
No,
Oh, the weekly update came in as
when
a
you get
weird ASCII
attachments
file, then you have to.
for the calendar, that's the only time that happens.
This is what I just stay with you.
It did. No, it did, but only because I happened to look up on the top of the email that said, touch here to download full message. Because before that, it was like one sentence, it made no sense. And when I clicked on that, I got the whole message and the attachment. But, I think I have it if you want me to forward.
Well, Shane said, the grandkids were playing at school.
Was not her
And I guess what I'm playing.
forte. She didn't push it, but now she's really stressed that she's going to not
How many grandkids do you have?
Three.
Where's your 20-year-old self?
Wow.
It was okay with just turning it
Every
over.
night, Saturday.
My mom's like 70, like my niece.
That would show me how bad I wanted to
She watched like 3 of them. She was up for like 3 days on the house. Other her walls
The
to
grass was deep green on the other side.
Well, my son.
WD says like,
By another round.
you your husband need over here.
Yes, we're she's gonna be here in a minute.
I'm gonna come back to
Oh, he
visit.
said,
Miles?
no, Miles.
Yeah, Miles is gonna make the missing work session and he'll be at that.
Yeah, it's got free beans. She keeps them overnight. She
That's
loves it, but yeah, it just runs her ragged. And I think she probably sleeps for 2 days and then leaves. Because they're like, I think in December.
And it's got to be.
I think there's 2 of them are real close to 3 and 4. And the other ones are
That's all it
Classmate, college.
Okay.
Won't even attend.
Well, we're gonna get started then. I think we have everybody we need. We're gonna get started with the town board work session for Monday, February 24th. Goal of a work session, as they always are, is to have the town board receive information on topics of town business. And tonight, we only have really one item, and then we'll talk about maybe future meetings agenda, if we have time, is the transportation master plan. Scott, are you gonna lead the way?
Sure.
Sorry.
So yeah, we have Carly from Fair and Piers here again. You'll recall we had our last work session on the 13th of January. And so tonight, at that work session, we were really just trying to find out if we were on the right track with the high-level direction of the Transportation Master Plan. There wasn't an actual draft of the plan in that packet. So in this work session, the intent is to give you an opportunity to, we'll follow up on the questions that were raised on the 13th. And also, we had a copy of the Transportation Master Plan online over the weekend. And so this is the first discussion, having that being out there. So with that, I think Carly has a brief presentation with some, a bit of history, how we got to where we're at. And then we'll cover some of those questions that came up, so.
Great. Thanks, Matt. So as Scott mentioned, our agenda will be, there are 2 items going over an outline of the Transportation Master Plan and some highlights of key recommendations, and then we'll jump into recapping the questions that we heard in January and any other detailed questions, but definitely feel free to chime in with other things as you have questions. So an outline of the plan. I know it's a hefty document, so just a high-level summary. Starts with the existing conditions assessment, which is a snapshot in time of what is the status of kind of multimodal transportation, as well as programs. At that point, it looks at safety, demographics, and that's a good point of reference as you continue to update your TMP moving forward, looking back on existing conditions at the time of adoption or publication of this TMP. Then it goes into public outreach results. So we had an extensive public outreach process to residents, employees, business owners, stakeholders, and so outlining who did we hear from and what did we hear from them, and how does that inform the plan. Then it goes into a vision and goals, so a vision statement that we'll look at, and then the goals to support that vision statement in order to move forward with that kind of 20-year horizon, ambitious vision for your community. And then it jumps into the recommendations, so it gets into infrastructure recommendations, talking about the pedestrian network as well as the bicycle network. And then with recent regional transit, how can the town of Windsor support regional transit, and what does local transit look like? Kind of a high level overview and an assessment of potential local transit options. And then the roadway improvement plan was done 2 years ago, so wanted to update it with a lot of great progress over the last 2 years, and make sure that the roadway piece captured all updates to roadway classifications and was integrated into the multimodal recommendations as well. Safety is extremely important, so looking at safety plans and recommendations for a safety reduction program and what the steps are to work the number of fatalities and serious injuries down. And then policies and programs that we'll touch on in a few slides. Emerging mobility and innovation. Transportation is changing extremely quickly. We have a sense of what things will look like in 5 years, but this is a 20-year horizon plan, so how can we help support Windsor in looking forward at autonomous and connected vehicles, on the shorter term electric vehicles, and some policy recommendations. And then implementation roadmap. A lot of recommendations here. What is guidance to be able to implement those? How do you leverage funding opportunities, and what is that? How do we give the plan teeth and help guide staff moving forward and have this be a document that can break down those steps in the process. So you've probably seen the link to the plan, which has been kind of put into a hopefully easy to read format, and so go into a little bit more detail on some of the highlights of the plan from the executive summary. So the process, which is an important part of this, is it's community-based document. So existing conditions, as we mentioned, and then hearing from the public and from stakeholders to be able to capture how do they currently travel and how would they like to travel, and how do we bridge that gap? What are those challenges that they currently face, and then how can we find the opportunities to be able to make recommendations so that people can travel more safely, comfortably, and in a convenient and efficient manner. And so those two pieces informed a vision statement, which you can see here on the right. That is that Windsor's transportation system in 2040 will serve all ages and abilities through a connected, multimodal network that is safe, equitable, efficient, comfortable, and intuitive. And so the plan prioritizes recommendations in order to reach this vision. And then what are the recommendations that came out of this process? So we have a pedestrian program, which created a tiered prioritization system that identifies locations in the city that fall under Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And this will help guide the town as to when to complete sidewalks that are gaps in the network and when to upgrade sidewalks that are deficient, so those that aren't ADA accessible or don't have the adequate curb ramps present. And so this, as funding becomes available, you know what parts of town to be able to fill gaps in the sidewalk first and to upgrade sidewalks to reach the sidewalk standards. And this also looks at crossings. So you've got a great pedestrian crossing guidelines. There are a lot of locations that need crossings. Where do you start with that process? And on the bicycle side, we have a map in the plan of the on and off street bicycle network, which also the off street network accommodates pedestrians as well. And so how can you ensure that someone from the ages of 8 to 80 can comfortably travel by bicycle to key destinations? So we show a map of what are all of those corridors, and then define each of those facility types, and are adding in detailed drawings for reference to for those standards for new facility types that you don't currently have present. What does that look like when implemented on different corridors? And then crossings are a part of that network as well, so it's important that when the bicyclist reaches an intersection, that they feel just as safe crossing the intersection as when they were kind of going along that block. And then the roadway component as well. So we looked at all the recommendations that FHU made in the roadway improvement plan, updated ones that have been complete, updated any changes to extents, and then added a little bit to that list, changed some roadway classifications as well to make sure everything was up to date on the roadway side as well. In addition to infrastructure recommendations, there are a number of policy and program recommendations. So as we talked about transit with Greeley Evans Transit, Fort Collins to Greeley service, stopping in Windsor, seems like it's been a great success so far. How does Windsor support regional transit with first last mile gaps? So that's through bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, transportation demand management, which are strategies to be able to better utilize the service and the infrastructure that is available, as well as education and marketing, and what can Windsor do to really be able to capitalize on that service and make it accessible for employees and residents. And sounds like there's a lot of great anecdotes of folks using that service already. And then local transit, what does on-demand transit look like in Windsor? It's extremely high level, but a question we wanted to ask the public while we were in front of them. And so the TMP summarizes what we heard from folks, and if an on-demand transportation program were to exist in Windsor, what could that look like, and makes recommendations for a future study to go into greater detail if that's something that the town is interested in. Safety, sorry, it's hidden under transit, but a crash reduction program. So every year there unfortunately are a few fatalities in Windsor, and so thinking about towards a Vision Zero program of getting to zero traffic related fatalities and how to get there. Safe routes to school, already a lot of great safe routes work, and so formalizing that program, there's a lot of great grant funding opportunities, so kind of capitalizing on those external grant options, and we prioritize schools to focus those programs and infrastructure recommendations around based on location in the town and modes share at those schools, and some survey data that was available as well. And then maintenance, recommended a lot of great facilities. What does this mean as far as changes in maintenance funding? You've got a great snow and ice control plan, building off that to prioritize corridors as bicycle facilities are implemented as well, considering not just the prioritizing corridors for maintenance based on vehicle travel, but bicycle travel in addition. And how to kind of make that multimodal in addition. And a few additional programs. So emerging mobility, how do you leverage now the resources available before autonomous vehicles come out? How can you have policies already set on things like parking, curbside management to be able to more effectively manage those changes that are coming online? Shared mobility, so thinking about everyone not owning their own vehicle, or how do you think about kind of optimizing a fleet that can be available to share a subscription-based model. So all these are a long time in the future, but things to keep in the back of your mind for design standards and setting policy as well. And I think the most important and most relevant to Windsor, you've got some electric vehicle charging stations. How do you continue to implement those and support electric vehicles? And then there's an appendix on autonomous and connected vehicles as well, which is kind of thinking one step ahead, something to keep in the back of your minds as well. And implementation, so this goes into funding sources and the breakdown of funding by mode that's recommended. If you were to implement all of the recommended projects, how much money each year should be dedicated to each mode to successfully accomplish the implementation of this plan, so that's all laid out. And then also, how do you work with developers and leverage those opportunities to implement trails as development is built, and use those opportunities most effectively. So flow charts in here to help guide staff as to who to bring to the table and what decisions should be made. And then monitoring and performance measures. So how do you know if you've been successful? So there's a table of all of the performance measures and what data is needed to be collected to track and make sure that each year Windsor's effectively implementing the plan and on track as they should be. So this is kind of the last E in all the E's of engineering, engineering, education, encouragement, and enforcement is evaluation. So knowing where you are and where you need to be will also help make decisions. So any questions on the high-level overview of the plan? We've got some details coming up too, but wanted to make sure we addressed the high-level pieces.
Continue on.
So these were some of the questions that we got last time that we were here on January 13th. So the network feasibility study completed by CDOT. So this is in the roadway chapter and an important reference to make sure we're building off of studies that were happening concurrent to this effort. So that was something that TMP collaborated with. And so the recommendations that alternative alignments wouldn't produce the desired results on Main Street there was a question about this last time, so just wanted to address this and acknowledge the scale of the TMP relative to specific corridors and that connection as a part of this effort.
Yeah, so that question came up at the last meeting, but as Carly said, this plan has a 2040 horizon, and it's really not specifically directed at one, I guess, issue. It did incorporate the CDOT study, and it's incorporated the roadway improvement plan and other plans, but we didn't include in the scope a really detailed dive into the same topic that CDOT was trying to address with their study. So,
Yeah, I guess I'm curious to what extent are you incorporating the CDOT study into your recommendations or your analysis? Because quite frankly, I would throw the CDOT study out and start all over, since they never used the word truck anywhere in their study. It's relevant to Main Street. So, yeah, if we urbanize it, we now know what'll happen, but that's not, I hope, our long-term goal. So, is this an integral part of your analysis, or?
No, so it was important to be a part of the process with this, but the TMP's system-wide 2040 vision, so kind of looks more town-wide at the roadway network without tying in specifically to these corridors.
So for example, if I could, the TMP is gonna talk about 257 and Crossroads and 392 and all the streets are tied into this, but it's just not exclusively focused on those. So I think to the extent that Crossroads one day is contemplated to be extended towards Greeley and the O Street connection, I mean, that's an identified project. It's just not, the stated goal of the TMP isn't to remove truck traffic from Main Street. That was this other study. So I think it's just like, again, it's the entire network in town. So it's just not drilled down to this. So that's all I would add.
Yeah, the scale is much higher level.
Along that line, I had a question in your recommendations, and I appreciate that it was not part of your charge to look at designated truck routes, alternate truck routes, but there was a recommendation there that we should work with, what the trucking association is.
Yeah,
I
totally know what you're talking about.
Okay, my question is, how broad is the representation of trucks that actually come through Windsor? I don't know.
Right,
I guess, are they the right people to talk to about helping us if we ever want to do an alternative truck route?
And that was a recommendation that was taken directly from the
CDOT.
Yeah, from
Right.
that study, and so
Yeah.
CDOT and Windsor should work with the
Yeah.
Colorado Motor Carriers Association.
Right, that's what we're.
So that's referencing that
Yeah.
CDOT plan.
well, and even before the CDOT study, we had contacted the motor carriers group. It's probably been 2 years ago now, and they seemed willing to come up and work with us, but I had to contact them 3 or 4 times and really never got them to commit to really working with us on anything. I don't know if we had a proposal or something that we wanted to float by them, they may become interested, but at that time, I really couldn't get any traction with them.
Well, and we have talked to a little bit internally about the fact that as part of the CDOT study, the one piece of data that was really wasn't measured that well is the truck traffic, right? Because we're relying on cell phone data and the trucks, and so it seemed like there's a pretty big range as far as how many trucks are really downtown. So we talked a little bit internally of, is there another way for staff to try to verify that information? Is there another way, we're gonna have, with our parking study,
Right.
we're gonna have cameras pointed downtown. Is there some way to just like take this data and have somebody, and it wouldn't be me, but somebody, go through and just measure and say, well, how many of these are gravel trucks? So it's still a little bit more locally originated versus other 18-wheelers. Is there any way for us to try to back in to that?
Yeah.
So again, that's really preliminary, but I just think that, I think everybody should be at least skeptical of that truck data, because even they said this is hard for us to measure.
Right.
So I think we just need to put in another effort, if we really want this data, if we really want to know. And I think that by doing that, we'll have a better idea of, working with this group is really in our benefit or not. Because if 90% of the trucks going down Main Street are gravel trucks, we're gonna know they're going in between these pits, and there's really no way to route them.
And I appreciate this, that was not the purpose of this study, but it caught my eye when they recommended that group, because ideally you would involve the customers, if it's to the trucker's advantage to not have to go through Main Street, so if there's a way to, if they had an idea of where they could go, that's what I was eventually trying to get to, is invite different parties to come up with a good solution.
And just so the board knows, so the whole 392-257 study, now that we have an engineer on board that has a lot of traffic background, now that we have a planner on board that has a lot of traffic background, I just wanted to kind of sit back internally and have the discussion with them and really kind of reframe this conversation and see if there's something else that we could kind of throw up against the wall and stick as far as what other options are out there without given this study.
Right.
So, I don't think that the CDOT study defines this. I think it just lets us know, okay, that wasn't the path.
Right.
But, so anyway, we're gonna continue the conversation and still see, if not this, then what? It seems like we're pretty limited based on that study.
So it's just in there, it doesn't represent a recommendation or anything other than just whatever the findings were at that time.
Right.
Right.
So kind of foreshadow to the results from the memo that was produced on trucks specifically by Stolfus as well. And so the data that you're all, sounds like, familiar with, the 20%, and acknowledging some of those data sources as well. So just wanted to have this here as we have this conversation. I think it was also pointed out, why is there, sorry, sorry.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, it was my blood pressure drove my arm up.
Reflex.
Yeah.
The gap in Crossroads on the map that we presented at the January 13th meeting. And so the reason that there's a gap is the green represents roadway to be widened to 4 lanes, and that section has already been widened, so thus there's a gap there. So.
Yeah, and the other reason that it also doesn't show up as a yellow, because it's not a multimodal
So
corridor.
the yellow backing is when there's a trail adjacent to the roadway being recommended as well. And so that shows up in the trail network, but not, or in the bicycle and pedestrian network, but not in the roadway one. And then the last question about performance measures was a great one to point out the 7 performance measures that had been identified and vetted as a part of CDOT criteria as well. So this came from collaboration between North Front Ridge MPO and CDOT and the town. So we went through these 7 criteria and made sure that all of the performance measures in the TMP spoke to these. I think that's key for funding and making sure that you're meeting each of these. So we didn't modify any of the goals, but did add some language to the performance measures under those goals to make sure it was really clear these connections. And that is all I have. Next steps would be adoption, and so we've got 2 dates on the calendar pending comments.
Yeah, we were hoping to schedule for the 9th if there weren't any really big red flag items or change of direction at this point. Otherwise, we also reserved the 23rd, just in case there was something that town board had that we wanted to follow up on and bring back anything further before putting it on a regular agenda.
Question. Specific pages 99, 100, 101. You list top tier projects for bike boulevards, bike lanes, trails, and roadways. There are 6 projects in each of those categories based on the data that you have.
Exactly.
Okay,
And
that's what I
then-
thought. I want to be sure that's what
Yeah,
it's
so-
reading. Okay,
Carly, could you just kind
Yeah.
of walk the board through the point system? I think that'd be great. for
it's
them to
really good, I
understand.
think.
Yeah.
Which page was that again?
He was
Um,
99.
I'm looking at 99, 100, 101, where we're getting specific projects based on the data and recommendation. And then I'm looking at the cost.
So in appendix, two appendices that relate to this. Appendix H, so actually just had a training with staff on how to use the prioritization tool that produces these results. So if you do want to change any of the inputs, staff is all up to speed on how to do that, and you'll own all of the tools that were behind this. And then we also have an appendix I, all of the projects. So didn't want to get this plan to be too much longer than it already is, so wanted to just show the top prioritized projects, but that full list is in an appendix. So a little bit about the methodology that went to inform this prioritization. So we did a spatial analysis with all of our proposed projects, and we created performance measures. And those performance measures were based on what we heard from the public, what we heard from you all, as well as stakeholders, planning commission, and town staff. And we came up with 4 performance measures that really quantified the goals from the community. And those performance measures were safety, efficiency, increasing transportation options, and public health. And so if you look back at the goals, those are the goals that are quantifiable, that best inform
Yeah.
project prioritization. So for safety, we looked at where are the most number of severe injuries and fatal crashes, and we created kind of a heat map of those, and we pulled out those top ones. So the more crashes around a proposed project, the higher score it received in the safety category. And then for efficiency, we looked at what is the project type and how does that help move people faster. So Bike Boulevard would be on the lowest end of that because we've got bikes sharing the road with vehicles, so that would get a score of 1, the lowest score. A new roadway project is on the other extreme, that will move the most people through that project. You're producing a new roadway, which will give access to a significant number of vehicles. So provided scores based on the project type as well as the volume to capacity ratio of the 2040 forecasted travel demand model. So basically how congested is that road anticipated to be, and then the project recommendation on that corridor will help address that congestion or that forecasted congestion. And then increasing transportation options was the third performance measure, and that's how many destinations are around that proposed corridor. So we looked at parks, trail access points, transit stops, and schools, I believe was the last one. And so we basically counted up the number of destinations within an 1/8 of a mile buffer of each proposed project, and then gave project scores 1 through 5 based on how many of those destinations it was close to. And then the last one is population, or public health, which is population density. So you guys are growing really fast. We were lucky enough, you guys had great GIS data on addresses, so we used that to look at population density and what projects are around the most number of Windsor residents. Higher score means you've got more residents near that project, lower score, you're in a lower density area. So how can we serve the most people? So each of those subscores got a score 1 through 5. We added them together and then basically just ranked them. And one additional piece of that formula was a weighting system. So for each of those 4 performance measures, we gave it a weight based on how much did we hear from the community, how much is national best practice saying that that's a really important driver for a project. With that, we gave safety the highest weight of 3. So if a project gets a score of 5 and their safety and a weight of 3, it actually gets 15 points. Versus public health only had a weight of 1, so a score of 5 it would only get 5 points, 5 times 1. So we use that system to come up with scores that will give you these outcomes. And so I know that sounds like a lot, but it's all in the plan, and staff is is fully kind of up to speed on that process.
So like on the top tier roadway projects, depending on how much money we have for the 2021 budget, these are in order based on that scoring system.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Steph, we just talked about that these should not dictate, blindly going in and doing projects on those, but serve as a guide to
Right.
start those conversations.
Priority could change based on there's an opportunity. So the
Exactly.
developer comes in and we have an opportunity to do, okay.
Exactly.
But these would be our highest needs, maybe is the right way of saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Highest
exactly
needs
the
is the way-
conversation we
okay.
had, and,
Okay.
we may say, well, geez, the next year's CIP, we recommend, projects 2 through 5.
Right.
Because number one, for whatever reason, we think somebody's gonna come in and do it in a year anyway.
Yeah.
Or,
Okay.
the cost may be prohibitive, so again, it's just gonna be kind of that starting guide to help prioritize and inform the CIP, but it won't be the definitive end-all be-all.
A lot of qualitative factors, ease of implementation, funding sources that all go into this too.
When you were looking at like population clusters with current and I guess some forecasted growth, were you looking also at Timnath, Severance, West Greeley? Because certainly as they grow too, probably some portion of their residents are gonna come down to 392, come through Windsor.
So this just looked at who has an address within an 1/8 mile buffer of a proposed project. And since all of our projects are proposed within town boundaries, it was just address points of Windsor residents at this moment in time. But we did discuss qualitatively growth in the region, and in the existing conditions talked about travel trends and how the regional transportation plan from the North Front Ridge MPO that was just adopted looks at who lives and works in Windsor, who just lives in Windsor but works elsewhere, and where are those regional kind of travel direction patterns and how to anticipate those growth trends. So that's definitely an important piece of this.
We get hard copies?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Well, that'd
Yeah.
help.
Yeah, that would be
Better
good.
not so a lot easier than this. I had one more question about these top tier recommendations. Your study probably doesn't give us a town board or staff direction as to what's more important, like a protected bike lane versus a roadway, or
Yeah,
those are decisions we'd have to make as a town.
it gives guidance, funding
Yeah.
breakdown, so
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
the pie of funding,
That's a
how
long time.
should that pie be broken down between on-street bike facilities, trails, pedestrian program, roadways,
Okay.
and then other
That's not right.
programs?
Okay.
I can find a page number. And so that will help you, you have this pot of money for trails,
Mhm.
and how should that be spent?
Okay, I think I did see it. Just didn't mention it.
Well, and again, this is gonna be, I think, for the board, when you go through the CIP, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, that's fine.
obviously a place where the board is gonna really need to give us direction as far as this is how important these things are to us, and then we'll see how that falls out.
Yeah.
We're paying Carly like $75 per minute, so.
Well, I
No, I know
appreciate
this
it.
is a lot of information, so definitely, been a
A
minute.
hard copy will help. I appreciate that it is data-based in the process involving our community, our citizens, and we have kind of a roadmap, if you will. I'm just, thinking about, it's roughly $21 million a year, minimum. Yeah, so that's low blood pressure.
Mhm.
Yeah, as
Right.
Dave said, yeah.
Your arm goes up.
It happens often.
It does.
Might want to have it looked at.
Well, and just the roadway improvement plan had over $130 million in projects, but it was
Right.
also over a 2040
Right.
horizon.
And so what we talked about as an exercise just today with staff, is we were trying to think, how do we get this down into understandable chunks for the board, for the
Yeah.
public? And so we talked about conceptually, just kind of building out that 20-year CIP and just forecasting the revenue for 20 years to see, are we falling really short here, folks? Like, does this happen, or what needs do we have? So the board can see in the long term, whatever it is, we're never gonna have enough money for protected bike lanes. We
Right.
just can't do that and
Yeah.
roads. So
As much as-
our options are either not do protected bike lanes, move priorities around, money that goes into CIP, ask people for new cash, you know, whatever that is. But I think it'd be good to really inform these things and see kind of the big picture at the end. So anyway, we just talked about that today of trying to build that in and trying to make this a little bit more digestible.
Well, and flexibility too.
That's exactly, I was gonna make sure
Right.
that there's lots of flexibility in here, even towards where the direction is leaning.
Yeah.
Because, you said this is a 20-year plan, and so that's based on today's thoughts and
Right.
trends.
Right.
But 10 years from now, we could be in a whole new different realm,
Exactly.
and whole new different
Exactly.
thoughts. Some of these things we thought were gonna be moving that direction, they could be either not going at all, or there could be something completely new and different. So,
And that's exactly what Carly was getting at.
so I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, no, you're right, that's my point, because development may change, where we think somebody will, and somebody else comes along as well, so.
Just wanna make sure that this
Right.
plan,
Right.
you know, it has that
Yeah.
ability. And so,
Yeah.
how often will this be looked at just exactly for that, to say, okay, we're on course with this? Is this like every year, every 3 years, or you kind of come back and say, yeah, this is all going exactly the same, or this is not going at all, we need to change like this section or this piece of it, or,
Well, I think part of the recommendation is that we set up a committee or internal technical committee that will be monitoring
attack?
this going forward. And also it has recommendations about what kind of data we need to be collecting on an annual basis, so that we're kind of starting from scratch with this effort, but going forward, we'll have data that we'll need to be collecting annually and building on, so that we can also use that information. But as Carly indicated, this is a guide, it's not a hard and fast, we must do the top 3 projects. It's something that will help inform your decision-making process.
And then also, Scott, I know just that we're obviously in 2040, we're not gonna be dusting off this exact TMP. I mean, this will be updated, right? I mean, best practice, Carly
Every
is,
5 years.
yeah.
Every 5, did you say?
So if Carly gets $75 a minute, we have,
Well, that's before taxes.
no, I'm just saying about our staff capacity, because, I appreciate the mayor's question about, because things do change kind of rapidly, that we have recession, things may go booming, we don't know. So where are we in terms of staff, and maybe you don't have to answer tonight, but just staff capacity, you talked about a TAC committee.
Well, it sounded like, that's what you are proposing, is kind of gonna be the overseer of.
Because the thing about the thing, my perception of Windsor is, it's been nice to have done this maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, but who has a crystal ball? And so we don't want to wait 5 years and look at it again. I think at least some type of periodic update that's more routine. I don't know what that looks like, but something about capacity of staff and staff time. And
Well, right now, I mean, the
the
board,
data collection is immense.
the board will recall when Dennis retired, we kind of reimagined his position, right? So we
Right.
took,
Right.
we brought an internal person to take over that leadership role for the engineering management side. John obviously had the department head role for the leadership. And then instead of hiring another just civil engineer, we hired Scott, who's got a transportation background. And so I think we're really trying to focus on this. I mean, obviously the board has been so concerned about this specific topic, right? I mean, there's no topic that I've had more conversations with the board about this in water. So I think that we're positioned, same thing with our new planner, David, he's really kind of a transportation planner. So I think right now we're in he's got a lot of planning background in transportation. So I think we're kind of focusing our staff to kind of rally more behind this kind of thing, have that technical capacity. If we continue to grow, we'll need to add more staff, but I think we try to point the organization towards this issue and try to have the right people on board.
What are the names of the 2 that you mentioned that have this background, David, who, and you
Well, so
mentioned another person?
David Eisenbaum is our new planner, and he came over from Loveland, and he's had a lot of transportation background.
He just completed Loveland's downtown parking study, so he's heading up the parking study that we're working on. And then Scott also came from Loveland, and he's worked on road projects. And
He's the one, the engineer that you talked
Mhm.
about, who has, what's his name? I mean, I'm just trying to get these, remember these
Sure.
names, because we got lots of
Scott
names.
Pearson.
Scott Pearson, okay.
Yeah, and he's a Windsor resident, and during his orientation, I said, fix our roads, Scott. So I've given him the charter, he just needs to get to work. Yeah, fix our roads.
So I'm gonna recommend, based on what I'm hearing and the importance of this plan, that we not rush to pass it on March 9th, that we get our copies of the 122 pages, and, give an opportunity, for folks to still make some comment or feedback, or even just say, hey, can we
Yeah.
talk about it
Yeah.
when we have our open board meeting, that second Monday in March, even to add whatever, and maybe look at adopting this on the 23rd, just so we have the time needed. And the 9th feels like a little rush to me.
There's no hurry, because we've already done our CIP for this year.
Right.
We need to have some, we need to know what we're gonna be
Wait,
doing
yeah.
next year, in the next 5 years. but we
That's
have-
what it kind
we
of
have-
feels like.
we
It
have
feels like
time.
there still might be,
We have
some
time.
folks who wanting to kind of look and
We can
just,
be through it.
Yeah, we just didn't want to send it out for printing until we knew that it was,
right.
there weren't any major changes, but we can certainly get those to you this week.
Okay.
How long does this process taken for the TMP? It's at least about a year, isn't it?
Just about a year.
I was gonna say.
We did the kickoff just about this time last year, I
Was it?
think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
thought-
really with the target to have it adopted February, March, so we're right on track.
I know this is digging into the weeds on this, but when we talk about doing this maybe every 5 years going forward, are we looking at it 4 years from now so that it's completed by the 5th year? Or are we saying, oh, it's the 5th year, let's take another year to study it, and then it's 6 years from now before, a lot can happen in Windsor in 1 year, that's why and we haven't done
Either
one of these
way.
before, that's right. That's what you were kind of alluding to, with
Yeah.
doing it a little sooner than
Yeah,
every
I-
5 years.
Maybe not full blown, but
So I think internally we'll have the technical team that essentially was the same staff that's worked on it this whole past year. So they, it's got people from engineering, planning, parks, and we've had public works involved at times as well. I think having that team continually working on it throughout the year, and then we'll be revisiting it every time we get the CIP discussion going. So I think there will be that ongoing conversation, but the 5-year, it isn't really a hard and fast review timeframe. If we decide that a lot has changed and we do need to update it sooner, or we think it's still relevant and it could probably go another year, that's a judgment call that the board can make at that
Well, it
time.
should take as long as this one did. This one really
This is
laid
our
a lot
first
of the foundation, and can you remind me what the cost of this was?
Is this one 100?
It's going up $75 every minute.
115 is what I want to say.
115.
For 50.
115?
I think 150.
It might have been 150,
150?
yeah.
The TMP budget, yeah, it was under 50,000.
And then,
And so when we update it, we will always be outsourcing that same kind of, I mean, is that what the anticipation
I would
is? But
think, Mary, yeah.
it won't be necessarily a whole year, or will it be this whole big?
What you're getting at, is, does it need to be as comprehensive?
Well,
Does it need
I
to
don't
be as
know.
comprehensive?
Well, maybe every
That's-
5 years you pull all the data of the population, because a lot can change here in 5 years.
Right.
But like every year, we at least check in and see where we're at without having the huge effort of saying how many people are within 1/8 of a mile of every data point, you know what I mean?
right.
That might be a 5-year thing, but at the very, but looking at these lists and saying, what kind of progress have we made? How does our our scheme work to prioritize things
The other
good?
piece is like, what things are coming up in the next 5 years we don't even know about right now.
Right.
Like what roads are getting expanded and, just based on growth and as different annexations come in and roads develop, it's gonna kind of change the makeup. So, I don't know that if we updated in 5 years with an outside consultant, that we would be much quicker than a year process.
It's recommended to take a year because the public outreach process is so
Right.
important to that, and it's really an iterative process of coming to them, incorporating those recommendations, so you want to give it,
So my question now is a little bit premature, but it's in my mind is, you said the one thing you hear from us as board is transportation. That's what I hear from the public, number one, is.
Mhm.
Do we have any ideas about how to communicate to the public what our master plan is? Or do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's on the website, the project website, or the town's website that has a project subpage currently. So I've been working with Kim.
So we are
Yes,
gonna do
on
some kind of communications
social
outreach.
media, yeah, she's been great through the process on Facebook and Nextdoor to make sure that people know about the open house. So I think continuing to use those mediums of communication to let people know the draft.
It needs to be sophisticated. I mean, it's a challenge because I'm thinking about broadband. When we talk about broadband, people think instantly they're gonna have it tomorrow. You know, and this is a 20-year plan. So when we get to that point, I don't wanna set our public up thinking that, oh, wow, this is gonna be a new 4-lane highway here
Definitely, and that's
tomorrow.
been, yeah.
So
in
we
part-
gotta, you know, have a good strategy, I think, on how to show the whole
Or a good
thing.
intro of what this really
Right,
represents.
right, to help people understand, here's what's coming the next year or two.
Yeah.
and-
I can see someone looking at it and say, Colorado Boulevard, it's gonna be 4 lanes, when? Next year?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my
well,
gosh.
you know.
No, I don't
Hey,
know.
That's what you were promising people, weren't it?
You told people
Are
that.
we gonna be taking public comment again now before our adoption, or is the only public comment you still are relying on is just going
Four more
forward?
years.
It's really down to town board and planning commission.
You've
direction.
gotten all the public comment you intend to get at this point.
Right. But yeah, I think as far as the shorter term projects, those will show up in Visio, in the CIP, you know, so I think, I don't know if there's a way to communicate or somehow direct people from the TMP page being the long-range page to maybe another page that's talking about projects that are happening real-time and in the next year or two.
This is just top of my head, but you know, the newsletter we started is a tool. We've been having the inserts in the water bill about water, which that's being effective. I'm hearing people talk more about that. Talking points that we have when we do coffees and things. So there's a variety of ways, but I'm just thinking out loud again, but we probably need to have some ideas of how to effectively communicate this to the public so that we don't send them up thinking we're gonna have it all tomorrow, whether we're doing nothing. Either way, you know.
If I can, we do have a new communication specialist assigned to certain groups, and that specialist will be addressing the marketing of the TMP as one of our major projects. So we will be building those things and putting those stuff into there. We actually had that meeting, I don't know, a few hours ago, so.
Yeah, so up until now, Parks, Recs, and Culture has basically monopolized one of our communication specialists, so, I'm sorry, Stuart. So, the idea with our, the idea with our other person is really to focus on these other departments, you know, I mean, the police department, engineering, public works really hasn't had that focus, so I think we're really able to roll that out now.
That's awesome.
Yep. And then like Scott said, you know, really, I think the short-term stuff, you know, Visio is really tracking all these projects, so to the extent that the board, you know, says, yeah, you know, widen this road to 4 lanes or whatever that is, we'll really track that process through. So it'll be similar to our strategic plan where the public can really see, you know, step by step the progress.
Okay.
Thank you for your year's worth of work
Yes.
on this.
Thank you
Thank you.
guys, great feedback.
Okay, future meetings?
So, we have on, the second, 2 items, so we've got the, Park and Recs and Culture Strategic Plan draft presentation. We also have, the oil and gas location requirement discussion and continuation of that, from the board's discussion, January 23rd, or whenever we discussed that back in January. On the 9th, we'll have, well, I guess I don't have to read this to you guys, does anybody have any questions?
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, is there just anything else, I mean,
Well, you'd mentioned, so, I know that, a local sanitation company had sent the board some emails, and I don't know if the board wanted to.
well, I don't know if that, I mean, I think we're still are, I guess, questioning or wondering what we're gonna be doing with our recycling facility. Does it still make sense to continue it? I mean, you know, we've gone back and forth, we know. I don't know if that's a bigger conversation, but certainly it's looked to me like they were offering maybe another option to think about. And maybe they could be a fulfiller of something, but if we had that conversation, maybe we should get 2 or 3 other like players or options and just have that as a bigger discussion rather than just a discussion with them, is what I was
Was that what they
thinking.
were, is that what they were inquiring about though? It sounded like they were just wanting to be like the town's.
Neighborhood. That's
They talked a lot though about their recycling ability and the email to
Okay.
me anyway. It was.
I thought it was like, have the town use them for our
That's-
town waste, like town hall and.
Oh, well, and
Public
maybe,
Works
but
and,
that all
you know,
comes to maybe, I mean, a bigger discussion. Could they be,
Could they-
that's why I wanna have
Play
a
something
bigger
in
discussion.
recycling.
Could they be
Recycling.
something else, or are they somebody else that we could?
So I do have on kind of my future meetings saying in my office, which is just kind of the notes of these discussions, trying to round them up. I do have the recycling discussion down to get that scheduled at some point. I'd suggest maybe we have that update first, because I think, when we're talking about our recycling budget, I think that'd be a good start. How much money did the town spend last year, and I think we could break out our, kind of our, like tree recycling day, like all that brush, from our actual recycling. So that's one part of the discussion. I think the second one is the location itself. Eventually we'd like to move it over to kind of the Talking College Park side and make that a permanent location for that, to the extent the board wanted to continue offering that service. And I wonder, as we get everybody moved over to the Public Services campus, what parking is gonna really look like over there. And that, I think that's gonna kind of continue these conversations as well, because as we have more and more people using that facility, where's everybody gonna go? And so I think maybe we can start out with that recycling discussion with the board, just kind of give you an update. We can just talk about those costs, and then based on board feedback there, as far as, geez, we're spending how much, could we get another bid on these? That may kind of trigger the discussion with the private side of saying, do we do an RFP for this service? Do we look at doing something else? So I don't know if we want to get like 3 different operators in the room with the board quite yet. I would suggest maybe we do the recycling discussion first and kind of see what conversation happens with the board and what direction we get.
I'd like to know how much the recycling center is being used now. Because I know the last time we looked, for us to take that and get it recycled, we made like $100, don't you remember, like when they,
Oh, for the commodities?
Yeah,
Yeah,
was
the
it-
commodity market
Yeah,
is
it's
very.
But that's what I'm saying, isn't it
Probably
the commodities
right,
thing
yeah.
that we would be using one of these entities
Yeah,
for?
we're
So
gonna
that's what I'm
take it.
getting at. Gallegos Sanitation or whoever it is isn't gonna be recycling our brush pile.
Right.
It's the commodity stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah. And nobody
Am I wrong? That's what I'm
No,
gathering.
that's-
They weren't very specific to me.
Yeah, they weren't very specific from what I read, but that's what I was
Talk to
interpreting,
them.
so.
Okay, so again, I could certainly get a recycling update from the board, and I think, the cost, the usage, just all the quantitative data we can give the board for that, so we can have that discussion. I think
Yeah.
that would be,
Well, I think we went through it, a couple of years ago maybe now.
That one.
Because it was in preparation for knowing what we were gonna move and was
Right.
it being used and how much?
But we did a
and-
fall and
That's
a
fall.
community cleanup day, and what do those cost?
Yeah.
I think people really like those. Does it
Yeah.
make sense to
Like a
just
lot,
move to something like that rather than our own facility?
Right.
If we have other options too, which, but if somebody could at least get back to them to say, we will have a discussion maybe later this spring and.
okay, I'll try to find yours, they didn't actually email me, I think they
Okay.
just sent something to the board,
Okay,
but.
Are they two separate topics? Are we talking about commodities and brush recycling, or is it all
Well,
together in one, or?
I think we need to look at it all together.
Yeah.
I think it would be a good update for the board to just let you know, because we could also pull, I asked staff a while back, and need to follow through, how many people came in last year to use that rebate, as far as you know?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So we could get that update.
$10?
Yeah. I'm looking
Okay.
for that email.
All right.
I thought I forwarded you that email.
You
Oh,
did,
so you
that's
do
what I'm
have
saying,
it?
I would have to, I'd
Okay.
have to pull that, because they didn't email
Okay.
me, so I need to.
So I
do
don't
that.
need to resend it to you?
No, I can.
Just so they know that
Put it on the other side.
we heard it and all of that.
I think the brush recycling was one of our top complaints though. I said that would, when that went away, for sure. It was not a popular thing. I sent that link to a lot of people for the rebates and explanation.
Okay?
$100,000 in the hole.
And then our meeting
Yeah.
Thursday night, and we're the
Yeah.
hosts, so make
We
sure,
are,
yeah.
yeah, so that'll be 5:30 to 9:30, we're out.